Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling on a thread that might just unravel the entire sweater of modern organizational logic. And I mean that literally.
It's a big one.
It is. If you look at almost any business, any startup, or frankly, most modern institutions, there is a golden rule that you just do not break. It's, the first thing they teach you in business school.
But spend money to make money.
Exactly. You spend your money to acquire customers. You put your best foot forward. You market, you advertise, you roll out the red carpet for the people who are not in the building yet. It's called customer acquisition cost, or CAC.
Right. It's the standard acquisition model. You spend heavily at the top of the funnel to get people in the door, and you worry about retention later. If you aren't growing, you're dying, and that growth comes from the outside. That's the logic.
Exactly. And in the church world, specifically the American evangelical landscape, that translates to a very specific set of behaviors. We're talking about evangelism, outreach, the Sunday morning experience, the lights, the coffee, the specific temperature of the auditorium, the vibe.
The vibe, yeah.
It's all designed to attract the seeker. But we have a stack of sources today, specifically two fascinating documents, one titled A Prepared Table Before Enemies and another called Feeding Jesus' Sheep, that are suggesting something. Well, radical is probably an understatement.
It is a complete inversion of the status quo. It's an economic and theological U-turn. It basically says, stop looking at the window and start looking at the dinner table.
We are looking at a proposal for what's called a reverse cornucopia budget. The core tension here is this. What if the best way to reach the outside world isn't to spend millions attracting them? What if the secret is to stop spending money on the outsiders almost entirely and instead spend that money obsessively loving, feeding, and protecting the people who are already inside?
It sounds so counterintuitive, doesn't it? To ignore the customer, or in this case, the goat or the seeker, to focus entirely on the sheep. It feels selfish.
It does.
It feels insular. But the argument in these documents is that mathematically, historically, and scripturally, the modern church has been doing it backward for about 50 years. And the result is a church that is wide, but incredibly shallow.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just going to talk abstract theory. We are going to audit the current system. We're going to look at where the estimated, $70 billion in the U.S. church economy is actually going.
Something like that, yeah.
And then we're going to do something I'm really excited about. We are going to draft a budget.
A hypothetical but very rigorous budget.
We're going to take two hypothetical churches, one small with a $100,000 budget and one large with a $1 million budget, and we're going to apply this reverse cornucopia model live. We're going to see what it actually looks like in dollars and cents to stop funding the marketing juggernaut and start funding a feast for the flock.
And we're going to have to ask, can you even spend that much money on believers? I mean, what does that even look like?
Right. Are we just buying golden toilets? We're going to see.
And I think what you'll find is that when you actually run the numbers, it forces you to completely reimagine what a church is for. It changes the sociology of the community from a venue to a family. It moves us from a content delivery service to a social safety net.
Okay, let's start with the reality check. Before we can fix the budget, we have to know what we're spending now. You've got the data from Feeding Jesus' Sheep. What is the status quo of the American church economy?
Right, so let's look at the back-of-the-envelope audit provided in the source. Now, a crucial caveat up front. There is no IRS for church budgets in terms of public transparency.
There's no central database.
No.
Oh.
We don't have a centralized auditor for Protestant Christianity. So these numbers are estimates based on aggregated surveys, denominational reports, and just the sheer scale of the evangelical community.
But the numbers are massive. We aren't talking about spirit change.
They are staggering. The total revenue pool for evangelical congregational ministries in the U.S. is estimated between $50 and $70 billion annually.
$70 billion. To put that in perspective for you, that's larger than the GDP of many small nations. That is a massive economic engine. If the U.S. church was a corporation, it would be on the Fortune 100 list.
It is. And the source breaks down how that money is currently distributed. It categorizes church spending into 4 specific stages of ministry. Stage 1 is evangelism and outreach.
Okay.
Stage 2 is baptismal catechism, so getting people ready to join.
The on-ramp.
Exactly. Stage 3 is for new believers, things like Sunday school or small groups. And stage 4 is what it calls mature training.
Okay, walk us through the current split. Where is the lion's share of that $70 billion going right now?
Well, on paper, stage one evangelism and marketing is typically listed at about 10 to 20% of budgets.
10 to 20%.
Yeah, that's roughly $5 to $14 billion a year. But, and this is a huge but, the source argues that this number is likely, well, stingy.
Stingy. $14 billion is stingy. Why would the source say that?
Because of how we categorize expenses. This is where the audit gets really interesting. Think about the modern church service. If you walk into a contemporary church, especially a growing one, what do you see?
I see a stage. I see probably some theatrical lighting, moving heads, color washes. I see a high-quality sound system, probably a line array. I see a coffee bar in the lobby with decent beans. I see printed signage that looks like it was designed by a professional agency. I see a welcome center. Everything is branded.
Exactly. The source calls these entertainment antics. The rock concert lighting, the smoke machines, the CCLI licensing fees to play the latest radio hits, the Christmas extravaganzas, the revival events.
The Easter production with the rented camel.
The rented camel, yes.
Oh.
In a traditional budget, those things might be listed under worship or operations. But the source argues that functionally, those are marketing expenses.
I see the logic. I mean, if the goal of the smoke machine is to make the visitor feel like they're at a cool, relevant venue so they come back next week,
Then it's a customer acquisition cost.
it's not discipleship, it's marketing.
Precisely. You don't need a laser light show to teach the Bible to a mature believer. A mature believer is there for the word and the sacrament, theoretically. You need the lasers to attract the person who is bored by traditional church or who thinks it's irrelevant.
Okay, so the real number for stage one is much higher.
The argument is that if you reclassify the vibe, the aesthetics, the production value, even the salary of the worship pastor, whose main job is to create an emotional experience as marketing, then the juggernaut of stage one consumes a massive amount of operational energy and cash.
It effectively devours the budget. We are spending billions to make the church look like a concert venue or a TED Talk.
That's a fair critique from the source. So we have this massive front-end spend. What about stage two? Baptismal catechism, this is the instruction you get before you're baptized or become a member.
The on-ramp.
The data shows this is negligible, maybe 1 to 2%.
Which honestly tracks with my experience. Usually that's just a couple of classes, maybe you read a booklet, you sign a statement of faith, and you're in. It's quick.
It's a very low barrier to entry and consequently a very low investment area. Then you have stage three, new believers education. This is your standard Sunday school, your small groups, your youth ministry.
Okay.
That sits around 8 to 15%.
So a decent chunk, but still not the majority. That's the maintenance phase. Keep the kids happy, keep the adults in a small group so they have friends and feel connected.
And finally, stage four, mature training. This is the deep end of the pool. The source defines this as training for people who have been believers for years who need meat, not milk.
And the spending there is?
About 5 to 10%. And often, this isn't even happening inside the church.
What do you mean by that? It's outsourced.
It's outsourced. If you are a mature believer and you want to really understand Greek or church history or systematic theology, the church usually doesn't offer that. They point you to a seminary. They say, hey, go enroll in this online program from Moody or Dallas Theological. You have to go pay tuition somewhere else to get fed.
So to summarize the critique from the source material, we have a system that is incredibly top-heavy. It's all weighted toward the front end. We are spending billions to get people in the door at stage one.
Right.
But once they are mature at stage four, we essentially stop spending money on them.
The source uses a very visceral, almost agricultural image here. It says the mature believers are often abused to milk the sheep to death.
That's strong language. Milk to death.
Think about the flow of resources. The mature believers are the ones tithing consistently. They are the ones volunteering. They staff the nursery, they greet at the doors, they pay the electric bill. They are expected to fund the stage one marketing machine.
But they themselves are not being fed.
They are the funding source, not the focus of care.
It's almost like a pyramid scheme, where the people at the bottom support the recruitment of new members, but nobody's actually getting the product anymore. The product of the church should be maturity, holiness, and deep knowledge of God. But if the budget is focused on acquisition, the people who have already been acquired become resources to be exploited rather than souls to be shepherded.
In a way, yes. And the source argues this leads to burnout, shallowness, and a church that is a mile wide and an inch deep. People sit in pews for 20 years and never learn how to read the Bible for themselves because the church never invested in teaching them.
Okay, so that's the problem. We're spending $70 billion, And most of it is trying to impress people who aren't in the family yet. Now, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Please.
Because the modern argument, the reason we do this, is usually framed as compassion. Pastors will stand up and say, we do this out of love. We want to save the lost. That's the most loving thing we can do. We should sacrifice our own comfort to reach the guy across the street.
That is the standard missiological argument. But this is where the source, a prepared table before enemies, really digs in. It challenges our very definition of love. It suggests that we have confused marketing with love.
How so? Unpack that for us.
Well, the modern sensibility, as you said, is love the whole world to attract them. We build bridges, we make the church look like the culture so the culture feels comfortable. We want to be seeker-sensitive.
Right.
But the source points to John 13.35.
By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.
Exactly. Look at the grammar of that sentence. Note the direction of the love. It doesn't say, by this everyone will know you are my disciples, if you love the outsiders. It says the world will be impressed. The world will take notice by the love Christians have for one another.
That's a crucial distinction. The witness isn't the marketing campaign. The witness is the internal reality of the community. The witness is the supernatural way the family treats the family.
And the source also cites Galatians 6.9. As we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. There is a biblical hierarchy of care. Especially. The family comes first. It's like the safety instructions on an airplane. Put your own mask on before helping others. If the church is starving, it can't feed the world.
This reminds me of the prepared table metaphor in the title of the first source. Can you walk us through that? It's a powerful image.
It's a reference to Psalm 23. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. The argument here is that God doesn't feed the enemies to impress them.
Okay.
He feeds the sheep while the enemies watch.
Oh, that's good. That's a very different visual. The focus is on the sheep at the table, not the enemies outside the window.
Exactly. The goats, the outsiders, the skeptics, the enemies are impressed not because we catered to them, not because we changed the menu to fit their palate. They are impressed because they look at the church and say, look how well those sheep are loved. Look at that feast. Look at how they protect each other. I'm starving out here in the cold, and they are feasting. I want to be at that table.
It's the difference between begging someone to come to dinner by promising them pizza versus having a 5-course banquet with your family and letting the neighbors smell the steak.
That is a perfect analogy. If you have to beg people to come or trick them with entertainment, what does that say about the value of what you're offering? But if you are thriving, if your community is radiant with health and care, people will beat down the door to get in. Attraction is a byproduct of health, not a product of marketing.
The source backs this up with history, right?
Yeah.
It talks about the early church in the book of Acts. This isn't just a theory. It's how the church actually started.
Yes. This is where the rubber meets the road. Why were deacons created? Acts chapter 6.
Usually we think of deacons as the board of directors, or maybe the guys who pass the offering plate, or the guys who fix the roof.
Well, in Acts, they were created for a very specific crisis. The Hellenistic widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. Note that. Daily distribution.
Daily.
The church was feeding its vulnerable members every single day. This wasn't a monthly food drive. This was survival.
So deacons were essentially internal social workers.
Correct. But here's the key point the source makes. They were not created to run a soup kitchen for the Roman poor. They were created because Christian widows were hungry. The social justice of the early church was entirely internal.
Sounds harsh to modern ears. What about the poor outside the church?
The source is pretty explicit about this. It notes there were no food banks, soup kitchens, or pizza lunches to convert the heathen in the book of Acts. When the early church collected money, and they collected a lot, Paul spent years fundraising. It was to support the saints. It was to pay for the Jerusalem church when they were in famine. It was for the brethren.
So the argument is that this intense, sacrificial internal care created a community so distinct, so radically supportive, that the outside world couldn't help but be drawn to it.
Exactly. Tertullian, one of the early church fathers, famously quoted the pagans looking at Christians and saying, see how they love one another.
Not see how good their coffee is.
They didn't say, see how cool their light show is. They said, see how they love one another. They took care of their dead. They took care of their sick. They took care of their poor. That was the magnet.
So if we accept this premise that the best evangelism is a healthy, well-fed, deeply loved church body, then the budget has to change. We can't keep spending 20% on smoke machines and 5% on mature training. The money has to follow the theology.
Enter the reversed cornucopia.
I love that name. It implies a complete flip of the horn of plenty. So, paint the picture for us. What are the new percentages proposed in the source?
Okay, get ready for a shock. If you are a church finance director listening to this, you might want to sit down.
Brace yourself.
In this proposal, stage 1 evangelism and marketing is cut to 5%.
5%.
Yeah.
Down from potentially 20% or more, if you count the vibe. That is a slash and burn.
It's a massive reduction. You are effectively dismantling the attractional machine. You are firing the marketing department.
Okay, where does that money go?
Stage 2, catechism baptism prep, goes up to 10%. Stage 3, feeding the lamb's new believers, goes up to 30%. And stage 4, feeding the mature sheep, explodes to 55%.
Wow, over half the budget. 55% of every dollar goes to the people who have been there the longest. That is the exact opposite of the modern church growth model, which says you shouldn't spend money on the insiders because they're already saved.
It is. But the rationale aligns with John 21, where Jesus tells Peter, "Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep." He repeats it 3 times. He doesn't say market to the fish, he says feed the sheep. The goal is the edification and holistic protection of the flock.
Okay, this is where I want to get practical. Because percentages are abstract. It's easy to say 55%.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean? Let's do the simulation. We have 2 listeners out there. One is a pastor of a small church. Let's call it Little Flock Chapel. They have an annual budget of $100,000.
Okay.
The other is the executive pastor of Megapolis Community Church with a budget of $1 million.
Let's see what happens when they apply the reversed cornucopia.
All right, case study A, the small church, $100,000 total pot. This is a typical small congregation, maybe 50 to 80 people. Under this new model, they only have $5,000 for evangelism.
Right, 5,000. Now, in a traditional model, a small church might feel pressure to spend way more to get their name out. They might want to do mailers or host a big fall festival with bouncy castles to attract young families.
They feel invisible.
Exactly. They feel invisible, so they spend to be seen.
With $5,000, you can't really do that.
No. $5,000 is basic maintenance. It's a clean, functional website so people can find you. Maybe a nice sign out front. Maybe some decent coffee for visitors. But you aren't running ads on Facebook. You aren't hiring a graphic designer.
You're keeping the lights on for the visitor, but you aren't chasing them.
You're relying on your members to bring people, not your marketing budget.
Then you have $10,000 for catechism. For a small church, that's actually significant.
It is. Usually catechism costs $0. It's the pastor chatting with you for 15 minutes in his office. But $10,000, that means you can buy excellent materials, hardcover books, not photocopied pamphlets.
Right.
Or, perhaps more importantly, it covers a portion of the pastor's salary specifically to dedicate hours to one-on-one training.
You're paying for time. The pastor isn't rushed. He can spend 10 hours with a baptism candidate because the budget says this is 10% of our priority.
Correct. We are funding the foundation, not the facade.
Then $30,000 for feeding lambs new believers.
This is your Sunday school, your youth work. In a $100,000 budget, $30K is a massive chunk. That might be a part-time salary for a discipleship director, or it might be a huge investment in curriculum resources. You could have the best library in town.
You could actually pay for childcare workers so the parents can focus on the sermon rather than relying on burnt-out volunteers.
That's a huge thing. It shows you value both the parents' learning and the workers' time.
But here's the kicker. $55,000 for feeding sheep. In a church that only spends $100K total, over half goes to the mature members. Now, in a small church, the primary expense is usually the pastor's salary. How does this fit?
This is a critical shift in mindset. In this model, the pastor's job description changes. He isn't a fundraiser, he isn't an event planner, he isn't a vision caster. He is a shepherd teacher. So the bulk of his salary comes out of this feeding sheep bucket he is paid to feed.
So we aren't firing the pastor, we're redefining him. His primary job is stage 4.
Yes. We are paying him specifically to study and teach the mature believers. But it goes beyond salary. The source mentions holistic care. Even in a small church, if you have $55,000 allocated for the sheep, and let's say $40,000 of that is the pastor's salary, which is modest but workable, you still have $15,000 left over.
What do you do with that $15,000?
That's your benevolence fund. But it's not a scrap fund that you hope you don't have to use. It's 15% of the church's total power.
Wow.
That means when a member loses their job, the church has a line item to help. It's not a scramble. Serving tables means if a widow needs heat in the winter, the church pays for it without a committee meeting debate about whether they can afford it.
It shifts the pastor from being a CEO of a nonprofit to being a frantic lover of the people.
Yeah.
And the budget actually supports him doing that. He doesn't have to worry that helping Mrs. Jones with her heating bill is eating into the marketing budget.
Yeah.
Helping Mrs. Jones is the budget.
Exactly. That is the mission. The budget reflects the theology. Mrs. Jones matters more than the hypothetical visitor.
Okay, that's powerful for the small church. It feels intimate. It feels like a throwback to a village parish. But I think the contrast gets even wilder and, frankly, more challenging when we look at the big church.
Yes.
Case study B, the $1 million budget.
This is where the scale really shows the difference. This is where it gets disruptive.
So evangelism gets 5%. That's $50,000.
Which, honestly, is still a lot of money. You can run a very professional website, have great signage, and produce a high-quality live stream for $50K. But, and this is key, you aren't spending $200,000 on a laser light show.
No.
You aren't spending $100K on a massive Easter production with live animals. You aren't paying a creative director $80,000 to make cool bumper videos for the sermon series.
So the aesthetic might drop. It might look a little more plain.
It will look less like a concert and more like a gathering. It will look human.
Catechism gets 10%, $100,000. That is a serious foundational investment.
$100,000 for catechism. You could hire a full-time pastor just to walk people through the basics of the faith.
Or run intensive retreats. Imagine if every person getting baptized went on a fully funded weekend retreat to learn the foundations of the faith. No cost to them. Deep immersion. They leave Friday, come back Sunday, and they have been soaked in the gospel. That's possible with $100K.
That's a huge statement about what you value.
Then $300,000 for feeding lambs, stage 3. That's your youth pastors, your children's ministry. That's robust. You are cutting the kids program here.
No, you're funding it heavily. But the goal is education, not entertainment. You aren't buying video game consoles for the youth room. You're buying commentaries and hiring mentors who can actually teach the text.
But now look at stage 4, $550,000. Over $500,000 dedicated to the mature believers.
This is the part I want to dig into. The source asks a provocative question here. Would we even know what to do with that resource? If I handed a typical church $550,000 and said, you can only spend this on people who've been Christians for 10 years, they'd be baffled.
They would be.
They'd probably just buy nicer chairs or pave the parking lot.
Right. They would think capital improvement.
Yeah.
But this isn't about buildings, so let's use the source's guidelines to spend this money. The source identifies 2 main buckets for this sheep fund: holistic care and education. Let's start with holistic care.
This goes back to the Acts model. Serving tables, stitching clothes, providing houses. This is where the church becomes an economic reality.
So in a modern $1 million church, $550K for sheep means you have a benevolent fund that is actually substantial. We aren't talking about a $50 grocery card.
No. We are talking about meaningful economic protection. Imagine a single mother in the congregation who is a faithful believer. She's struggling to pay rent and work and raise kids. In the status quo, the church might give her a food basket at Thanksgiving and maybe help with one electric bill.
And pray for her.
Right, and pray for her. In the reversed cornucopia, this church could say, we are going to subsidize your housing for 2 years. We are going to pay $1,500 a month toward your rent so you can breathe, so you can raise your kids in the Lord without panic.
Wow. That's $36,000 over 2 years. A typical church would say, we can't afford that. But this church has $500,000 allocated for exactly this.
They could do that for 10 families and still have money left over. Or consider the elderly couple who can't afford their medication. The church covers it, not as a charity case, but as a family obligation. The source mentions protecting and nurturing them rather holistically. This is creating a safety net so strong that being a member of the church actually has economic implications.
That changes the meaning of membership entirely. It goes from, I attend here, to I am safe here.
Exactly. It creates golden handcuffs to the kingdom of God. And think about the witness to the goats. If the outside world sees that losing your job doesn't mean homelessness because you belong to the flock, that is far more attractive than a cool sermon series on finding your purpose.
It's the prepared table again.
Yeah.
The enemies watch the sheep being cared for and say, I want that kind of security. I want that kind of love. How do I get citizenship in that kingdom?
Precisely. It turns the church into a distinct society within society, a counterculture of care.
Now, the other half of that 550K is education. And the source is very specific here. It's not just buying more devotional books. It talks about a longitudinal gospel curriculum. This brings us to section 5, the curriculum gap.
This is a fascinating part of the analysis. The source identifies a massive disconnect in how we teach. It basically argues that the church has forgotten how to be a school.
Lay out the problem for us.
Okay, think about how a pastor is trained. He goes to seminary. What does he learn?
He learns Greek, Hebrew, systematic theology, church history, hermeneutics. It's graduate-level academic work. It's rigorous. He's reading Calvin, Luther, Augustine.
Right, that's the seminary curriculum. It's steak. It's dense, nutritious, and hard to chew. But then that pastor graduates and goes to a church. What is the church curriculum? What gets taught on Sundays?
Usually, topical sermons, 5 steps to a better marriage,
Yeah.
how to handle stress, or maybe a light verse-by-verse walk through a book, but kept very accessible so visitors don't get confused.
The source calls it loosey-goosey needs-based activities, wedding challenges, youth messages.
So the pastor's eating steak, but he's feeding the sheep cotton candy.
Exactly. And the result is a curriculum gap. The pastor assumes the congregation can't handle the hard stuff, so he dumbs it down. But because he dumbs it down, they never learn the hard stuff. So they stay babies. They stay in stage 3 forever. They never develop the teeth to chew the steak.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of immaturity.
So if we have $550,000 to spend on these sheep, we aren't buying more cotton candy. We are buying what the source calls a middleware interface.
Middleware, that's a tech term. Software that connects 2 different systems.
Exactly. We need a curriculum that connects the depth of the seminary to the accessibility of the pew. The source points to the New Testament, epistles, Romans, Ephesians, Hebrews as the model for this.
How so?
Think about who received the book of Romans. It wasn't a room full of PhDs. It was slaves, dock workers, merchants in Rome. Yet Romans is one of the most intellectually dense theological documents ever written. Paul assumed that normal people could understand deep theology if it was explained clearly. He didn't dumb it down, he leveled them up.
The source specifically mentions Hebrews 5 and 6 as the benchmark for this stage 4 believer.
The author of Hebrews actually complains to his readers. He gets frustrated. He says, by this time you ought to be teachers, but you need milk, not solid food. He defines stage 3, the lambs, as learning the elementary doctrines, repentance, faith, baptism, basically the how to get saved stuff.
Okay.
But stage 4, the sheep, is different.
What characterizes a stage 4 believer in this model?
2 things. First, intertextuality.
Break that down.
It's the ability to connect the dots across the whole Bible. The source gives the example of Melchizedek. To understand Hebrews chapter 7, you have to know Genesis 14 and Psalm 1 and 10. You have to understand the Levitical priesthood so you can understand why Jesus is better. A stage 4 believer understands the canon of Scripture. They can read the Old Testament and see the architecture of the New.
They aren't just reading a verse of the day and trying to feel good. They understand the meta-narrative. They can trace the covenants.
Right. And the second thing is teaching capability. Hebrews says, by this time you ought to be teachers. Stage 4 believers shouldn't just be sitting in rows listening. They should be capable of instructing others.
So going back to our budget, if we have $500,000, we are funding a church-based seminary.
Yes, we are hiring teacher elders, not just charismatic speakers, but theologians, whose job is to train the members to read Greek, to understand church history, to map the covenants.
Imagine that. A church where Monday night isn't just a potluck, but a class on the Pentateuch that rivals a master's degree program. And it's free for members because the budget prioritizes it.
And you pay for the materials. You buy every member a solid theological library. You bring in guest lecturers. You create an environment where intellectual stagnation is impossible. You might even offer sabbaticals for members to take time off work to study.
This resolves the curriculum gap. Instead of outsourcing education to seminaries, which cost the individual thousands of dollars,
the church internalizes it. The church becomes the center of learning.
And think about the middleware idea. The curriculum isn't dry academic lectures. It's applied theology. is taking that deep knowledge of Melchizedek and asking, how does this change how we pray today? How does this change how we view our jobs? It bridges the gap between the academy and the street.
It makes theology live.
I want to pause and just envision this church. We flipped the budget. We have a community where the members are intensely cared for, rent paid, food on the table, true safety, and they are intensely educated. They know their Bibles inside and out. They're becoming teachers themselves. What happens to the structure of the organization? You can't run this new model with the old org chart.
No, you can't. In the status quo model, who are your key hires?
Usually, you need a lead pastor who is a great communicator. You need a worship pastor who can lead a band and create a moment. You need a creative director for the branding. And you need an executive pastor to manage the complex programs.
Right. Those are stage 1 roles. They are about presentation and management. In the reverse cornucopia, those roles diminish or disappear.
Who takes their place?
You need deacons of care. You need people who are essentially social workers and logistics experts to manage the serving of tables, the holistic care budget. You need to know who is struggling financially and how to help them wisely. You can't just throw money at problems. You need relational wisdom.
So you need people who are good at assessment.
Good at assessment. Good at navigating the healthcare system, the housing market, the counseling needs of the flock. You hire people who are good at caring, not just people who are good at planning events.
And then on the education side,
You need teachers, lots of them. You move away from the rock star on a stage model to a faculty model. Maybe you have 4 or 5 teaching pastors who specialize in different parts of Scripture. One is an Old Testament expert, one a New Testament expert.
and the atmosphere shifts. The source describes moving from a rock concert vibe to a banquet table vibe.
It becomes less performative and more communal, less loud, more deep. It's less about the person on stage and more about the people at the table. It changes the architecture of the room, you know. You're not building an auditorium, you're building a great hall.
But, and here is the inevitable pushback, doesn't this make the church insular? Doesn't this turn us into a holy huddle or a country club for Christians that ignores the dying world outside? We talked about John 13.35, but practically, how does this reach the goats? If we cut the marketing budget to 5%, aren't we abandoning the Great Commission?
This is the most common objection. If we focus on ourselves, we are being selfish. But the source argues that this internal focus is the most effective way to reach the lost. Let's go back to the budget. If a church of 500 people is spending $500,000 a year loving each other, paying medical bills, educating kids, caring for the elderly, that creates a social gravity.
Social gravity. I like that. Explain what that means.
We live in a lonely, fractured, individualistic society. People are isolated, they are in debt, they are anxious. If there's a community in their town that actually functions like a family, not just in name, but in financial and social reality, that is magnetic. It pulls people in.
So the marketing isn't a mailer that says, come to our cool show. The marketing is the rumor in the town that those Christians actually take care of their own. If you are with them, you aren't alone.
It's the table prepared before enemies. The enemy, the cynic, the skeptic watches. They see a community that isn't just talking about love, but investing 55% of its resources into it. That is undeniably attractive. You can argue with a sermon, but you can't argue with a community that pays your rent when you have cancer.
And remember, the stage 4 believers are being trained to be teachers. They aren't just absorbing info. They are being equipped to articulate their faith.
Exactly. In the current model, we bring our non-believing friends to church so the professional on stage can explain Jesus to them. In this model, the believer is the professional. They've been trained. So when the neighbor asks, why are you guys so different? Why are you so generous? The believer has the theological depth to give a real answer right there in the driveway.
So the evangelism happens organically through the equipped sheep rather than institutionally through the marketing department.
The sheep are healthy, strong, and articulate. They do the work of the ministry. The budget just feeds them so they can do it.
It's a compelling vision. It really strips away the consumerism that has crept into the church. It treats the believer not as a customer to be retained, but as a disciple to be developed.
And it treats the church not as a vendor of religious goods, but as a household of faith.
We've covered the numbers, the theology, and the curriculum. We've redesigned the org chart. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to recap the numbers one last time because they are so stark.
The reversed cornucopia. Evangelism, 5%.
5%,
Catechism, 10%.
10,
Feeding lambs, 30%.
30.
And feeding sheep, 55%.
Moving from a marketing-heavy model to a maturity-heavy model. From attracting goats to obsessively loving sheep.
And relying on the promise that this internal love is the true light of the world.
It's a radical proposal. It would require a massive amount of courage for a leadership team to say, we are cutting the marketing budget to almost zero and putting that money into a benevolent fund and a theology school.
It would. It goes against every instinct of the modern nonprofit world. It goes against the pressure to show growth numbers every quarter.
But the source leaves us with a final thought that I think haunts this whole conversation. It's not just about whether we would do it, it's about whether we could.
That is the question, the source asks. If we actually reallocated all these resources to grown-up Christians, would we even know what to do with them?
Meaning, have we been starving the sheep for so long that their stomachs have shrunk?
Exactly. Do we have the capacity to digest a feast of deep theology? Do we have the communal trust to handle radical financial generosity? If I gave you $10,000 to help a brother in need, would you know who to give it to? Do you know your pewmate well enough to know they are drowning?
That's the conviction. We might have built a system that works for crowds but fails for community. We don't even know each other well enough to spend the money properly.
Or have we become so accustomed to the milk and the entertainment that a real banquet would just sit there uneaten? It's a question of spiritual appetite. Have we trained ourselves to only want sugar?
That is a provocative thought to end on. It's a challenge to you, the listener. If your church suddenly decided to invest heavily in you, in your depth, your well-being, your growth, would you be ready for it? Or would you miss the smoke machine?
It's a question worth asking.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the economics of the flock. It's a lot to chew on. We'll catch you in the next one.
Keep thinking.